Annie is a 15-year-old high school girl studying at Kingston College. She is from an impoverished background. At her age, she has to do some dirty jobs to support her parent, who finds it hard to afford some basic needs. Annie's father was a medium-income gardener, but a fire incident and an economic crisis crippled the family's resources. Despite her poor background and physical appearance, Annie has always been a good influence. She has a scar on her face. The spot was an injury sustained during the fire breakout. She was saved from the fire, but the scar on her face is indelible. The family can't afford cosmetic surgery for the spot. In the slum of the city where they lived, Annie would gather fruit nuts from her daddy's farm and give them to beggar immigrants' children, whom she thinks she is better than. She has always been optimistic about life and helps her poor dad in his garden. She is super independent for her age. At 14, she passed the grade exams and was poised to enter college. She applied for scholarships and got lucky with one. A famous firm that offers scholarships to less privileged children picked Annie as one of the kids to be offered admission. The criteria were based on her excellent grades in the elementary STEM exams. It was a day of great joy when she received her scholarship papers to start studying. Annie's father cried when he saw his daughter dressed for high school on the first day. Annie started school and did quite well in both class and extramural activities. The poor students always left with the school bus because of financial constraints and trekked home when the school bus dropped them at the bus terminal. Annie enjoyed this gesture and never missed the opportunity. One of these days in school, one popular bully took great interest in Annie. Peter approached Annie during recreation and wanted to know her name, age, and where she lived. Annie told him her name and age, but didn't reveal her house address. Peter picked up on this and insulted her for being physically deprived despite her age. He called Annie Scar's Face Jerry. Jerry stands for the famous cartoon character in Tom and Jerry series, while the scar is because of the mark on Annie's face. It was an awful day for Annie. She had never been insulted in such a manner before. She left the scene and started walking away from Peter. The bully, Peter, kept walking alongside her and talking down on her. Bran, one of Annie's schoolmates, saw what had happened. He started coming towards Annie. Peter left when he sighted him. Bran met Annie and tried to inquire what was happening. Annie told him what had happened, but got an unexpected reply. Bran said, "I know you look poor, but to have a scarred face on top of poverty is a nasty combination. I hope you get past the insults." These words were cruel and heavy on little Annie. She got home and cried bitterly. She never complained about these issues to her dad because attending such a prestigious institution was a dream come true for the poor gardener. Peter always had the newest, best, and most expensive everything. He is from a wealthy family, and his parents were significant contributors to the school's social welfare department. Another day in school, he lurked around until he spotted Annie, where she was sitting on the veranda. He walked up to her and bragged about his family's wealth, his newest belt, shoes, and Swiss account for his holidays. He was so mean and kept calling her Scarface Jerry. Annie stood up from where she was sitting and wanted to leave. The bully boy smirked and told her that her family was like an ant on the earth's surface. She could go on and report him to authorities. Still, nobody could do anything because she has no evidence, and her family is his immunity over any bullshit. These words dampened Annie's heart and hope. As a young girl, she has never enjoyed the privileges of a fair society, and she believes that reporting to authorities won't change her situation. In the worst-case scenario, the boy has a crew of friends. They could lie against her, and she could lose her scholarship. As days went by, Peter became increasingly mean and violent. On a cultural day in school, he got a new Mustang and some of the most incredible music, but used this to oppress Annie. It was as if he had a special hatred for her and would do anything to talk her down, pull down her esteem, and abuse her. One day he insulted Annie so hard that Annie lost her temper and wanted to kick his ass. Immediately she stood to fight. Peter's friends rammed her up and shoved her into a support pole nearby. She screamed in pain, but still Peter laughed while kicking at her. Two of his best friends were accomplices. They joined in the laughter and kicked Annie in the butt, calling her hard rock butts. Annie was determined to report them to the police or authority. Peter brought out a short gun, pointed it below Annie's belt region, and told her that if she ever reported this incident to anyone, he would shoot her in the streets, and nothing would happen. One of his friends also grabbed a short dagger and made the same threats to her. The bully left Annie with bruises that day. At home, the poor Annie became increasingly solitary and always stayed private. Annie's father worried over her sudden change of attitude, but he didn't board her so much. He blamed her unusual calm on puberty and school stress. Peter got more hostile and increasingly dire over the past months went on. After the assaults, he made sure that he threatened her. "Don't tell on me or I will fucking shoot you and your haggard hair. Also, don't tell the authorities because I will know. If I know, I will be marked for danger." Annie's grades in school started to drop. She became increasingly scared of her environment because her tormentor ensured he never let her out of his sight. She was young, had not been exposed, and genuinely believed he would find out and murder her and her father. She stayed silent and tried to avoid him as much as possible. Over the past year, other close cliques of Peter made life unbearable for her. They didn't refer to her with her real name. They nicknamed her Scarface Jerry. This name started affecting Annie's self-esteem, and an increasing number of school students used these derogatory words to her whenever there was a quarrel. She is one of the poorest girls in the school, if not the poorest. Hence, she always stood out both in physical appearance and material wear. One fateful day, the Kingston High School students went for a picnic. A student affair unit organized the breeze, and unfortunately for Annie, Peter was in her group for the excursion. Some school students didn't know how to swim in the pool. Peter can swim very well, but Annie can't. After the break, everyone left the pool and went to the bar. Peter quietly called Annie to come to swim with him. Annie acts as if this bully has defeated her. She obeys almost everything he says to avoid trouble and more bullies. When Annie came closer to him, he told her that he wanted to make amends for all the bad things he had done to her. Annie naively thought her woes were ending and wondered what had changed his heart. Peter offered to teach her how to swim, to say he was sorry for bullying her over the year. Annie followed him to the pool. The other kids had drinks and pizza at the bar. Peter took Annie to the 6-feet-deep pool area and then told her to try not to reach the ground. She was petrified. Peter encouraged her to move her legs and hands in sync. She was afraid but didn't fidget because Peter had been taking her around the water for 10 minutes. Suddenly, Peter went underground and swam far away from Annie. At first, Annie didn't know what was happening, but became scared when Peter shouted "Scarface" from the other end of the water. Annie was on lifeguard, but she was terrified. She almost urinated on her pants. The bully then swam to her again and dragged the lifeguard off of her body this time. Annie started shouting. She was so scared and was drowning when one of the securities noticed something was off. The security woman jumped into the water and saved Annie from drowning. Peter faked as if he was getting soaked, and security kept him. He did this so that Annie wouldn't have allegations against him. It was a sad day for Annie when she thought her woes were about to end. She never knew his erratic behavior could be this tormenting and dangerous. The security guard escorted them out to the pool area and warned them never to enter the deep pool area without supervision. When Annie got home, she wanted to open up to her dad and tell him what has been happening for 1 year and 2 months. She's been going to school. The dad was happy about the picnic she went to, and she didn't want to disrupt his joy. Annie has always been very considerate, but she fears something might happen to her one day. She is also scared that if her dad gets to know what is happening, he will go head on with her bully and this may get too serious that something dangerous might happen. Annie started getting depressed. The pool incident gave her nightmares, and she couldn't concentrate throughout the week. Day by day, he was making life miserable for her. 2 days after the pool incident, he keenly observed to see if she would report the incident to authorities. She didn't. In the afternoon, everyone went to the playground to play. Annie was absent-minded and walking across the flower area. Suddenly, someone karate kicked her from the side. The kicker turned out to be Peter. Without thinking, Annie caught hold of his ankle one-handed. She cupped it from underneath and held onto it so high that it couldn't go without tipping him over. Peter swung his fist at her but couldn't reach her. He didn't want to kick with the other leg because he knew if he did that, the legs would get outstretched and he would fall over. All he could do was hop and threaten Annie. Annie held his leg without saying a word. He threatened her with all sorts of dire consequences, but Annie didn't say a word. Instead, she stood her ground and held him. Students in that vicinity noticed what was happening and formed a circle around them. The students started laughing and laughing a lot. Everyone was happy because his many threats still fell on deaf ears. One of the teachers got a glimpse of what was happening and came there to separate them. After separating them, the teacher took the two to her office. When they got to the teacher's office, Peter started laying heaps of false testimonies against Annie, accusing her of being a bully who torments other kids in school. The teacher didn't believe these words because they had a report about Peter's erratic behaviors. Annie was sobbing and shedding tears and couldn't bring herself to say all the torment she had received from Peter since she entered the school. After a few minutes of crying, she got solace from the teacher's consolations and finally decided to open up. She told the teacher how Peter tried to drown her the day they went for a picnic, called her Scarface Jerry, and how he and his friends had made her life unbearable for her in school. The teacher was shocked to get these revelations. She hugged Annie and apologized on behalf of the school for negligence. The case was forwarded to the principal of the school. Peter was finally expelled from the school, and his crew of friends was given 2 months of suspensions each. 6 months after this incident, news speculated all over the internet about a boy waving a large handgun at police officers. He had crashed a car into the tree, jumping out yelling profanities, and waved a gun at the police officers that came to arrest him. The police warned him to drop the firearm, but he didn't. He kept threatening and yelling at them. He attempted to pull the trigger, so they shot at his arm and arrested him. He later died in the hospital from a gunshot injury. Annie was happy scared when she got this news. She was happy that her tormentor had met his Waterloo, but was scared because what if the bully had shot her as he attempted to shoot the police? In the following years, Annie graduated with flying colors, got a job with a famous company, and changed her family's socio-economic status. The family moved out of the slum and rented an apartment not far from the capital. She got corrective plastic surgery on her face. At 29, Annie got her dad a Mercedes-Benz model car. She promised to care for him and make him as comfortable as any good daughter would. The joy was overloaded in this little family.
It's a medical emergency, and we will need another abdominal surgery right now, said the doctor, to save the kid's life. It seems that a dead angel was roaming the hospital's corridors. The doctors were running their best efforts to save the poor children. It appeared that they had some intestinal infection, but the gastroenterologist revealed a severe gastrointestinal illness leading to the emulsion of fungi spores. The blood reports claim that the fungus spores are rapidly approaching hundreds and thousands in number. Therefore, the blood texture and skin color were gradually turning pale green. For the first time in history, Mr. Mickelson was up to something that lies beyond the boundaries of his competence. He is a well-known gastroenterologist and a nutritionist in the town. He led the case of 3 children who got admitted last night. The condition of these 3 mates was terrible at the time of admission. The eldest one was a 12-year-old boy named Jay, an 8-year-old girl named Alexa, and a 3-year-old toddler, Alini. Miss Steve reported these 3 children. She called out her friends to help her out with the matter. Miss Steve is an old friend of Carla and the mother of Jay, Alexa, and Alini. Carla and her husband, Suzanne, divorced each other last summer. To earn bread and butter, Carla worked in the neighboring town. By profession, she was in charge of the production line in the main center of California. She was supposed to work at the production house for about 3 weeks a month. Meanwhile, her dear old friend, Miss Steve, used to take care of her children when Carla wasn't at home. Miss Steve and Carla's children shared an inevitable bond. Her kids adore Steve's presence, and she enjoys the pleasant, innocent aura of the children. When Carla worked in the field, Miss Steve was the only one cooking and cleaning for her children. Miss Steve was a researcher who believed in the concept of a microbiome diet. A diet was rich in protein, organic supplements, and a lactose-free diet. She is believed to have built a special microbiome diet to revive her name in the Guinness Book of World Records. She was the only one who raised her obligations in favor of ingesting some potential parasites and fungus into the digestive tract of humans. Initially, the Public Research Board rejected her proposal, but a strong alliance later joined her. This was Dr. Mickelson, the handsome bachelor with brown eyes and dusky color. His sharp nose, bright eyes, and perfect physique were enough to seduce the town's women. Like others, Miss Steve was also one of the huge fans of Mr. Mickelson. Steve jumped into the research without considering any facts and figured it was enough that a hot, charismatic man would assist her side. Working in his extravagant laboratory was an incredible honor for Miss Steve. They worked together for months and prepared a manual named The Vegan Diet. The manual aims to bring harmony to the internal functioning of humanity. Initially, it was tested on 100 people, and luckily all benefited. Most sample people were cured of heart disease, blood infections, and other gastrointestinal issues. The diet became famous as the Miracle Diet. Mr. Mickelson and Steve were honored by the chief of the city. Success and appreciation were there for them, but Steve always wanted the experiment his way. A short, heightened woman wearing glasses with a cracked mind that no one knows was standing among the people briefing her research and future goals in the community center, and she was Miss Steve. On the way back to her friend's home, her thoughts were mingling across her mind. My idea of adding octopus stinkhorn in the microbiome diet is working, and people are getting benefits. What if I increase the amount of octopus stinkhorn in the diet? Consequently, more and more people will be turning towards veganism, she said to herself with an evil smile on her face. The car stopped in the garage, and the lights were off as usual. Stepping ahead towards the door, there was an unusual silence over there. Searching for keys from her bag, the door opened by itself, and there was a suspicious expression on Steve's face. Surprise! This was Carla standing in front of Steve with a bottle of champagne, ready to celebrate her best friend's success. "Ah, you just gave me a heart attack, dear," Steve said with a smile and immediately hugged her best friend. Stepping into a hallway, a big dinner was ready for the celebration. The aroma of garlic bread with Russian salad was complimentary for the night, and was a decent smell of baked turkey with the cheesiest mac and cheese. Everyone settled down along with their kids. There was laughter, jokes, and a memorable time being kneaded into a mesmerizing portrait. There were mutual friends and Carla's kids at the table. Among the chattering, shrill voice raised, "Can you cook something for us, please?" with a smile. This was a tiny sweetheart named Alexa. "Why not, love?" Steve stood up from her seat and paid the little one's hair while making charming eye contact with her. Why not a microbiome diet? Carla suggested, a glass of champagne. Yeah, the Bayside porridge, Jay recommended with enthusiasm. Steve gave a smile and stood back in the kitchen. She was cooking something great for the pretty customer, Jay and Alexa. Carla was quite drunk, and she went to bed. The kids were waiting for the delicious meal on the table. Food is here, said Steve. There was joy, and the kids filled their plates with the meal. It was warm green and tasted like green seaweeds, a punch of tomatoes, and Steve's unique vegan capsules. The kids adored the taste, and nothing was left on their plates within one go. Steve collected the dishes and asked the kids to settle in their beds. 3 of them greeted good night, and with a warm thank you, they returned to the room. Piling up the plates, she thought it was time to introduce my vegan capsules to the world. There are no side effects on the kids. For a long time, Steve was working to turn down the kids into veganism. She dreamt of the world being vegan. Therefore, she initiated her career with Dr. Mickelson. By gaining his support, she was able to research actual human subjects. Before practicing, Steve has already concluded by practicing them on Jay, Alini, and Alexa. The 3 kids were being fed vegan food, but by tonight, Steve took one step ahead by adding the octopus fingers to their diet. The one she believes that there are miraculous properties to increasing human metabolism. If the plan works, my name will be the only name in the vegan history. While piling up her thoughts, she stepped into the kids' room to check whether everything was okay or not. She entered the room, and there was silence. She turned on the light to collect a blood sample from 3 of them to study. The kids were unconsciously lying on the floor. This is terrible, she said to herself. What am I going to do? She turned over to Jay. His skin color turned green. She checked the heartbeat, and the heartbeat was dropping down. Unfortunately, she couldn't detect the heartbeat of Alexa and Alina. What have I done? Steve was shivering, and she called 911 for immediate medical help. This was quite pathetic. She took Carla and went to the hospital. Mickelson told Steve that the 2 girls were no more, and they tried their best to save Jay. Something poisonous was added to their meal, and the doctor knew it must be the evil Steve. He informed the police to draw further investigation. Before the police arrived, Steve admitted that it was her fault and she was the murderer. Carla was in great shock by this night. She had lost her girls and a best friend who was evil in disguise. The doctors were working quite hard to save Jay, while the higher authorities declared Steve a death sentence. We have to pay a heavy debt of extremism and radicalism. The radicalism belief system in our society needs to be changed, as history reveals it's not good for humanity. The weight on one side can be a disaster. Therefore, there is always an end to a healthy balance. And Steve deserves the consequences, ultimately. Sometimes our passion grew into our obsession that led us towards extremism, and then we lost control of ourselves and our kind. Therefore, we must always watch our path, emotions, and passion. He wrote the letter, left it on the door, and hurried back, almost getting himself hit by the car on the road. He ran until far away from home and stopped in a bewildering area. He gathered his thoughts and pondered over what had just happened to him. That morning, Oliver accidentally saw his father in a mart, and one look at his old wrinkled face destroyed all his strong strings. That older man in front of him wasn't supposed to look that old, but the worries, tension, stress, depression, and anxiety he had given to him were enough to make him look that old. He followed him to the door secretly and saw his mother at the door as well. His small house was the same as he had left 1 year before, but the people living there were utterly changed. The smile had left their eyes entirely, and they were merely living life without any happiness and hope. Once they both went inside, and the door closed, Oliver's heart dropped. He felt the door also close his light and hope for life. Something rattled his heart and gave him the courage to do something he never thought he could. That's when he wrote a letter and left it outside the door. It was the darkest night of the year, or at least that's what Oliver felt, because this night all he desired was light. But was he worthy of having light? Oliver Benjamin, a 17-year-old, intelligent, lean boy, was standing right next to the cliff, throwing stones into the water. Every rock he was throwing in the water made the sound of a slight splash and nothing. In the dark, his senses were depressed with every passing second, and his whole life was dissolving into nothingness right in front of his inner eyes. All those significant and minor ill-doings and his misdemeanors were swirling in his mind like a typhoon. He closed his eyes and left himself on the shore of painful memories. The image of himself when he was 13 clicked in his mind when he shouted at his parents and even broke things at home. He remembered how his mother was so scared of him when he called. She cried that night because of him, but he paid no heed, like it was no big deal. Little did he know how much a big deal it was. All those tears were still fresh in his memory and were pouring on his heart like acid. The memory of 15, when he first spent the night outside and lied to his parents about smoking. He could still smell that smoke, and it was suffocating him to the point of death. How wrong he was to think that he was a person of a strong mind. He can't get addicted so quickly, but no, he was so weak enough to be destroyed with one single blow. Why? Why didn't he listen to his father then? Why did he have to experience the shame, embarrassment, and cruelty of society? Why? How can he face his parents now? All these thoughts made him tear up and fall to his knees. It's been a year since he had left home, and what he had been doing since then, nothing. Nothing. What he was and what he had become. What he had done to himself. What had he done to his parents? He knew his father suffered from cardiac arrest, yet he never returned. He never even bothered to understand how he was, if he recovered or not. Was that enough to know that he was alive? When did he become so cruel? He was supposed to be the arm and shield of his parents. Then why did he become a source of utter shame and chronic disease for them like that? Will they accept me again? He questioned himself, and a shouting answer was no, because all he had done in these past years was absolute wickedness. No matter how much my parents love me, they won't accept me back. I am sure they must have learned to move on without me. The thought shattered his soul, and for a moment he thought of jumping on the cliff and ending his pathetic life. But then he remembered the letter he had left earlier at the door of his parents. He got down from the cliff and started walking on the beach. Should I go or not? He was confused as to what to do. It wouldn't matter if I won't. It's not as if they were waiting for me. He looked at the far horizon of the sea, which was dissolving into the dark sky. Even the moonlight was unwilling to come out tonight. But then, what if they were waiting for me with the light on? A thought crossed his mind, and his heart filled with unsaid thousand emotions. He shook his head. No, I shouldn't have high hopes, and only look at what I have done. The pessimistic side dominated again. He put his hands inside the pocket, and a few notes came out, enough for the cab fare home. But it was the money he begged. That's how he had fallen in past years. What would his parents say when they learned about his ways of living? I will embarrass them more. It's better not to go. Wouldn't it be even crueler not to go? His mind had a mega war between being accepted and rejected. His mind was telling how pathetic he was, and common sense was that his parents would leave him, but his heart was saying that no matter how low he fell, his parents would always love him no matter what, and they would accept him without complaint. With all the thoughts running, he hired a cab and headed home. His pain was turning into agony as he was nearing his home. The taxi passed the street and moved from under a bridge, the last stop before his house. He recalled his mom's and dad's sad faces and thought they could never light up the torch because he had done enough to hurt them. Finally, he reached, and the cab came to a halt. His eyes are closed, and his heart is beating so rapidly. He opened his eyes slowly and saw the place was entirely dark. No lights were on. He wasn't forgiven. He wasn't breathing. He felt that his life was ending. But then he observed a silhouette through the window. His parents came out of the shadows. He thought they didn't want him to be at home and were coming to ask him to leave. But then his dad smiled. Her mom hugged his dad while weeping. He didn't understand what was happening. Were they laughing at him? Were they laughing at his fate? But then his dad clapped 2 times with his hands and looked towards the house. The torch's light turned on. An unstoppable stream of tears started falling from Oliver's eyes. He left the cab and looked at the lights in weird bewilderment. Son, when I saw your letter, I couldn't believe it. But when I saw your feet on the ground in front of me, I can't explain how I felt, Mr. Benjamin said between smiles and tears. Oliver couldn't utter a single word. All he did was stand stiff in one place and look at his fate. Was he worthy of forgiveness? You asked me to light up the torch, but when you decided to come home, and if it helps you, I thought I should light up the neighborhood. Mr. Benjamin explained further. While saying these words, he clapped his hands, and all the lights around their house started to turn on. Torches, street lights, car lights, every possible morning was on that evening. The light of his life returned, and he was forgiven. He hugged his parents at once and cried like a small child. His parents hugged and kissed him back like they never hated him ever. At that moment, Oliver realized, indeed, it's never late to apologize and forgive. Thief, please help me. Little black thief is running in the park. She was accused of stealing. There was a handsome number of policemen in the park. A white lady accused a black boy of stealing her PS5. The people in the park began to chatter. Suddenly, there was a sharp sound of screaming from the child. There was a crowd, and it seemed that something quite terrible was going on. A man stood forward to offer his help. What he saw was an end to the humanitarian. A policeman was dragging the little boy with him. He seems to be 11 years of age. By now, racism was reaching its extremist state. The man inquired the policeman why he was taking the poor boy with him. The little one was briefing that he was not a thief. The woman has accused him of theft. The boy's statements were entirely justified, but the lady's evilness was quite exclusive. She was a lawyer and defended her beautifully and convinced everyone that the little boy was a thief, and he was making up the story of owning this PS5. Excuse me, ma'am, do you have any of the proof against the little man? The man in the park asked. His name was Josh. Yes. This is the payment slip for my stolen PS5. It's convincing now? The woman asked with an aggressive tone while holding the PS5. At this moment, there was a harsh silence in the park, and the origin of suspicion turned towards the poor boy named Baldwin. Josh went silent, and then he whispered something in his ears. The woman is right. The collective voices of people merged in the playground. These Africans deserve this. Get back to your poor land. You thief, rascals, poor mates, get back to your rubbish towns. You won't deserve PS5. Get away. Take him to the police station. Lock him up. There were hundreds of voices, and each of the statements merged, and there was a single conclusion of all to lick the boy behind bars and give him a harsh punishment. The little man was scared, and he began to cry. He knew that there was no one to save him by now. Taking advantage of the whole situation, the white policeman dragged the boy to his car and took him to the police station. The entire incident happens on 89th Street in North California. The woman who accused the boy of stealing his PS5 was a lawyer by profession, a divorced woman, and incredible features with sharpened eyebrows, flattened cheeks, black eyes, and shoulder-cut brown hair. This is Jenny. Jenny was one of the famous and highly experienced lawyers who held the potential to win consecutive cases in a row. Her winning statements in the courtrooms were a powerful inclination in his career. Whatever happened in the park, she did it on purpose. Practicing manipulating statements outside the courtroom was her pleasure. She seeks pleasure by manipulation and lets people suffer from her evil acts. And this time, the unlucky Baldwin was her target. The police took him to the police station and filed a complaint against him. Baldwin will need a lawyer to defend him in court after dealing with the whole situation. These days, there was an extreme emphasis on the purification of the state, which means the authorities were taking some preventative measures to free their areas from the black people. For centuries, color distinction and racism existed, and it is justified to say that the concept has been rooted in the culture, and that extremism is justified enough. One of the police officers asked Baldwin to call for his parents so they could proceed with further legal confrontations. At the same time, Jenny was preparing some legalized documents to keep the little boy in his place. She was also one of the extremists and was constantly supported by the higher authorities of the state. Thanks to the professional acquisition of Miss Jenny, she managed to keep the boy behind the lockers for 2 days. While Baldwin told the police officer many times that he isn't a thief, Baldwin called his Uncle Jay. He was a co-worker of Jenny, a handsome young man who stole her heart quite long ago. Their relationship won't last long, but their career demands them to be best friends on Jenny's side. This wasn't the actual reality. She wants revenge, and when one of her spies at the police station tells her that poor Baldwin is their nephew of Jay, "Well, that's a bonus, Mr. Jay. Time has arrived when you will pay for the deeds," Jenny said to herself, with a mimicry smile on her face. She knew that she wouldn't keep the boy inside the locker for so long. There was a need to make a story or a shred of evidence against him. She locked herself in the room and began outlining possible ways to help her torture the little one and his uncle in the jail. This is the right time to put the sharp, intelligent Jay in his place. Jenny made a call and asked the higher authorities for help. She ended up the call, and there was someone at the door. The bell was ringing so abruptly that someone was there in quiet haste. Jenny turned to open the door. No one except a parcel mentions her name. "Dear Jenny." "Quite suspicious," she said with a confused tone. Rolling her eyes at the parcel, she managed to pick that up. It was the heaviest one. She dragged the package to her living room. It was dark at night, and someone left at the door just like that. She was curious about what would be in that package. Opening the box, she found bubble wraps, many wraps, and a heavy tape recorder with some files, an envelope of pictures, and some payment slips. She took them all to her study room to examine what they were. Running through the files, she went pretty aggressive. On the last page, there was something written for her. Dear Jenny, you don't know me and never will. I have been keeping an eye since you moved into this house. There is some great information that might help you to get to know about yourself. Hey, don't get that furious. You look like a pumpkin when you get aggressive. There is a small gift for you. Just open the envelope. What the hell? Jenny said, and she threw that file on the floor. There was a piece of sensitive information about Jenny's career, her family, and how she takes privilege from men. She took that picture envelope, and there was a row of higher authorities, and Jenny showing a costly romantic view. Who could it be? Jay? I will burn down the person who is after me. She called the police station, and they informed her that they had released bail for the boy, as there was no other evidence against him. The court has ordered you to run a case against you for manipulating everyone at the playground and making the poor boy suffer. Further, the policeman added that the jury had immediately canceled her license, and he hung up the call. Jenny was devastated. There must be a strong alliance with Jay or the boy. There must be someone who has messed up with the whole case. But who could it be? Jenny was collecting her thoughts. Laying in bed, she couldn't even sleep for a moment as her mind was preoccupied with horrendous thoughts. The following day, there was an exclusive headline about Miss Jenny, how she cheated on her husband, and her evil ways to win every case. She seduces prosecutors, and that's how she gets privilege. The person against him was using her weaknesses. A day before her license was canceled, her image deteriorated into fine pieces the next day. She was furious and could feel her heart pumping. How was she going to face the whole world? There was again someone at the door. Jenny collected her courage. With heavy steps, she opened the door. There was no one, and again a parcel lying in front of the door. She picked up the package and placed it in front of herself. While attending to thousands of thoughts in her mind, she opened the box, and a letter was beautifully packed inside the brown square package. She opened the letter, and it said, Dear Jenny, I am so sorry that I visited your study room last night and left without a good-night kiss. I missed that, but I was in a hurry as I emerged to collect your files and some information that would help me understand what sort of lawyer you were. I am not Jay or any of your lovers. You will soon meet me, I promise, sweetheart. Terror was reflecting on her face, and she tore the letter down into tiny pieces. There is something I should have to do. She went to the study, and there was not a single file of hers or the ones she received yesterday. She returned to the living room and gathered the tiny pieces of the letter with a sellotape and took it as evidence to the police station. This evidence wasn't enough to file a case against the unknown blackmailer. The policeman assured them that they would look after it by themselves. Everyone on the street was staring at her, and there was gossip among the public about her changing men every night. On her way back, she saw that her house had been burnt. She got herself panicked and asked the neighborhood to help her. There was nothing left for her. Suddenly, another mysterious letter caught her sight, hanging on a tree. Jenny, this is all that you deserve, accusing my son of nothing. This is your destiny, how you misused your power to please yourself. Now you have nothing except your ego and your internal rage towards black humanity, and your career has vanished. I hope you will learn a lesson. Jenny took that letter and left the town. From that day, no one knew where she went. Racism and discrimination are society's evil elements, and many innocent lives have suffered from this.
Life is full of mystery. The more you try to unfold it, the more you continue to realize there is more to it. Everything seems normal in this popular hotel in the city. People are coming in from every part of the world, as tonight is the night for the popular gala night. The hotel has been repainted purposely for this event. The color of the hall looks radiant as every staff seems to be working hard to ensure the event turns out to be better than the previous year. While everyone was busy getting prepared, a voice caught a young man's attention. It was an older woman. "Excuse me, young man, can you help me cross to the other side?" she asked politely. The young man, who looked like someone at the event of losing an appointment or a dinner, reluctantly agreed to help her without asking further questions, as he forced a smile on his face. "Day could not get any better," he said silently as he helped the older woman and walked away pretty fast as they got to the other side of the road leading to the famous hotel. The woman gave a relieved sigh. "At last," she said as she approached the door of the hotel with her crutches. An old woman who should be in her 80s was limping with her crutches, trying to get into the hotel. Judging by her mode of dressing and her look, what could she be looking for? She seemed to be a beggar or someone from a low-life family. This was the dialogue that transpired between two security officers who were on duty. "Sorry, ma'am, but you can't go in," they said as she approached them. The older woman's countenance changed as she pleaded with the security officers to let her in. Unmoved by her words, they brushed her aside in a bid to let in their customers. The older woman could not hide her emotions anymore. Tears gathered around her eyes. "I own this place," she quickly comments. The officers asked what she had just said, and she repeated herself. Security stares at her from head to toe scornfully, and one of them asks, "Ma'am, would you kindly leave here before I call the cops?" She cried out that she owned the hotel this time. She was very loud that she attracted the attention towards her directly. People started to stop by and ask why the security officers are harassing an old woman on crutches. While some of the guests condemned the officers' cold attitude towards the older woman, some praised them for doing their work diligently, as any beggar shouldn't be allowed into the same hotel where highly respectable personalities exist. I would rate this hotel 0 star and tell them how bad the hotel has become if this dejected woman is allowed here, an unknown voice amid the gathered crowd roared. He probably looks like a business person of high profile, as it is known that nothing flies as fast as wrong information. It flies faster than a rocket, making the situation noticeable to the hotel's owner. To appeal to the people about the problem, he comes out only to find his grandmother at the center of the situation. He rushed towards her and gave her a big hug. Everyone was astonished, and there was total silence. It was as if a minute silence was being observed for a loved one who had just departed. The security officers were as confused as the guests. Why is the CEO all out and embarrassing himself? Hugging that old wag is the height of it. The expression on the people's faces said it all. The CEO manages the situation by introducing his grandmother to all and orders that the security officers escort his grandma into the hotel for the gala night. She smiles as she approached the door of the office. "A lot has changed here, and I can see you are doing well to keep our family's legacy after all these years. I'm super proud of you, Tony." Tony, the CEO, smiles with a questioning face as he offers his grandmother a glass of water. "Come on, son. I know that look. I might be struggling health-wise, but you should know I will never miss the gala night again this year. It could be my last, you know," she said with worries on her face. But Tony moved closer to her to reassure her that she would not die anytime soon with a warm hug. Tony asked why she had to board a plane alone, risking her health. She told him she was trying to do anything that makes her happy, as happiness increases her lifespan, and to retake a glance at the hotel. They both have a good laugh. "Grandma, I'm not impressed with what happened earlier. I should make some clarifications." Tony requested she stay in the hotel, as there were first-hand situations that he needed to address in front of their VIPs at the event. She said that was fine. She dipped her hands inside her bag to take her med. I shall wait here for you, son. Tony leaves for the office, but not after instructing the security officers to ensure his grandmother is fine and attend to her need. The older woman's eyes traveled around the room as she was impressed with Tony's development around the hotel. She was pleased with everything her eyes caught, and she knew even Tony's late father, who happens to be her son, would be proud of him. Tony returns to check on his grandma to be sure she's okay. He slightly opens the door and finds his grandma smiling. He chuckled and closed the door behind him. Tony knows the central question will be about the older woman he welcomed outside earlier. He is ready to face it and answer any questions in that direction. He climbs upstage to open the gala night, as it is the hotel's custom. As he approaches the podium, a loud voice throws a question he has been expecting. Mr. Tony, who was that beggar you hugged outside? He smiled and requested that the guest remain calm as he explained everything. He gives his opening speech and welcomes everyone who has honored their invitation. When he was done, he decided to talk about the older woman many had met earlier. So, many who care to know, that was my grandmother, and she is the owner of this hotel. The revelation caught so many by surprise that there was an indistinct murmuring in the hall. Mr. Tony decided it was time to let his grandma give her speech. He invites her especially to the podium in front of the special guests. As she approached the stage slowly with her crutches, she smiled brightly and stood in front. She could not help it as her emotions got the better of her. The number of the crowd moves her. Most people in the event become silent, waiting patiently to hear from the older woman herself. She begins her story after wiping up the tears. I am Mrs. Williams, the owner of this beautiful hotel, which is managed and well supervised by my grandson. Everything in life comes with a price, and we have to face whatever life throws at us, she says, still maintaining her smiling face. I am very ambitious, and I always try to beat my husband's success because I strongly believe women can also be seen as equal to men. I think so much about equality. My orientation got the better of me as I slowly began to drift away from my family. I built this hotel and many other companies around the state, forgetting I am needed as a mother to my son and a wife to my husband. Because of my target, I decided not to give birth to another child. At first, my husband strongly opposed it, but he eventually came to terms with me because he is very understanding. Tony's father, who was my son then, hated me so much for the lack of attention and love. This is something I have grown to regret every day. He grew up well through my husband's help and the maid he preferred calling his mother. I didn't seem to care. That was the least of my worries, as I was too occupied with the work that I failed to realize my husband was battling a terminal disease. He kept it away from me to ensure I focused on my ambitions. I could not have been able to save his life, but I could have been there for him when he needed me. At this point, she was getting very teary. Tony immediately recognized the symptoms as her mental illness beginning to swing into action. He rushed towards her, calmed her down, and decided she had had enough for the night. The audience was silent as everyone was touched by her story. They ponder in their minds as they had many questions that needed answers. Did the terminal disease eventually kill her husband? What happened to her son? Mrs. Williams begged Tony to let her continue the story, as that would free her from the heavy burden within her. Tony seemed reluctant, but could not do much as the older woman looked determined. All right, but you also don't have to do this. She looked at him, patting his back, and made her way to the podium. As she tries to mount the podium, the curious audience starts clapping and is all ready to hear her story to the very last. I was in my office when I was called by the family doctor, who broke the news of my husband being in a coma to me. On getting there, he explained the situation of things to me, which sounded like a lie to me. My husband looks healthy, I said to myself. She became emotional again. She recounts terrible. She cleans up her face and continues. Only then did I realize I had not seen him in a while. I rushed towards the ward and saw him on life support. My ambition ruled me, but I still loved my husband. And after months of looking after him in the hospital, and spending nights with him right beside him, he passed away. My son accused me of being the reason for his death and vowed never to have anything to do with me. Months later, everything seemed odd due to the end of my husband, who was the source of my wisdom and achievement. On the other hand, my son graduated as a business management first-class student, began to do drugs, smoke, drink, and even be accused of being a rapist. He attempted to rape a young lady at that time. His condition worsened when he became an addict. I tried to talk him out of it and be there for him, but he never saw me as his mother. He was in rehab when I learned he had impregnated a lady. I took the young teen in and began to care for her, and she gave birth to my Tony. My son's condition at the rehab grew from worse to worse, as there was no improvement at all. He started falling ill at the rally again. We later discovered that he had been smuggling drugs with the help of a guard. His lungs gradually began to fail. The drug damaged his kidneys. He was released to come home after I pleaded for his release for better treatment. On his arrival home, he was furious about the baby and vowed to deal with the mother. I went out with my grandson, to whom I had promised to dedicate all my time, only to get a call that the house was on fire. The investigation later had it that the fire broke out after my son tried lighting his cigarette in the kitchen after trying to calm his nerves. The maid who was at the home at the time, Tony's mother, and my son all died in the fire outbreak, leaving just my grandson and me against the world. The shock resulted in depression for me and led to my current health condition. The audience feels so sorry about what the older woman had to endure. Her story seems to be a very tragic. They also pitied Tony, who had never had the opportunity to see his parent. The older woman moves close, hugs him tight, and apologizes for taking his life from him. At this point, Tony could not control his tears as he held her close and sobbed into her shoulder. Everyone stood up and clapped as a sign of respect for them holding up strong. The old woman silently sighed, said, "I can get to rest now She smiled as she makes her way down with Tony holding her right. The older woman's story so inspired many people at the gala that they were able to learn 1 or 2 lessons. Solemn music plays in the background, as most people are left with the thought of not making the same mistake made by the all very costly, like the older woman.